What's up, everybody? This is the Upper Hand Fantasy Podcast. This is Faraz. I'm here with Zach. We're going to go over our quarterback rankings, our running back rankings going into week 14. A ever so important week for a lot of us to try to get into the fantasy football playoffs. I'm feeling nervous, Zach.
Yeah.
Feeling nervous.
You're feeling nervous? I'm feeling nervous. It's bad. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. The waiver wire that just went through last night did not fall my way, and I didn't expect it to. But it's fine. It's not a big deal. We'll work with what we got. I was scraping along the waiver wire, just picking guys up that you don't have to put a claim in for. I was scavenging a bit, but it's fine.
Yeah. I mean, you never know, man. Any given Sunday, any given week, you never know. It's one of those situations where in a lot of leagues, not just ours, like there are going to be situations where you're feeling kind of good. You think you secured a playoff spot, but if you don't have that asterisk next to your name, you never know. You never know, and you could, if you didn't clinch yet, it's possible that you don't make the playoffs. So we got to try to make the best line decisions that we can. So hopefully our quarterback and running back rankings can help you today. Tomorrow we're going to go over our wide receiver and tight end rankings ahead of Thursday Night Football. And yeah, man. So we got a little bit of news. Darren Waller, he has a chance to return in week 15. So he'll shoot right back to like a top 5, top 6 tight end, even though that probably doesn't mean much. I would check to see if anyone dropped him in your leagues just in case. His rostership isn't super high. So just check. It didn't go below 50% or anything like that, but it's sitting around 70, 75 on a couple platforms. So just check that real quick. The Rams claimed Baker Mayfield off of waivers. He probably won't play tomorrow night, but should have a chance to play in week 15 if they want to have him play. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the weapons to really thrive at all.
No.
And it's mutual. His weapons also don't have a quarterback for them to thrive either. So
right,
it's mutual.
That pickup was just to ride out the rest of the season with not undrafted, and backup guy, career backups. It's just to have somebody with a little bit of experience, kind of guiding the offense. The offense isn't going to be any better with Baker Mayfield. It's not like Baker Mayfield changes the trajectory of this offense. It's not like, what's his name? I forget. Van Jefferson becomes relevant suddenly, or Ben Skoranek becomes relevant suddenly. I don't know. Tyler Higbee was the only one that I was really kind of thinking maybe you could start just because he is a tight end, and that they've had a rough go of it this season. So I think that Baker Mayfield is just more of the same. It's not going to change anything. You can start him maybe if you're in a bad spot. But outside of that, there's plenty of other guys that you picked up this week you could pick up still maybe in like Tyler Huntley, even Brock Purdy. I'd rather start him. So
and we're talking about 2 quarterback leagues here. Like there's no way Baker Mayfield will get anywhere close to a top 15 quarterback this season.
Right.
It's not going to happen. So 2 quarterback leagues, that's the only league he'll be relevant in.
These are guys we're talking about. They're firmly out of the top 24, even I'd say. They're just out there starts, maybe dart throws, see what you can get this week. We're not talking about starting these guys over hardly anybody else.
Seattle signed Wayne Gallman to the practice squad, which makes sense given all the injuries in their backfield. No real update just yet on the health of these guys. We don't really know who's going to get the start this week. So we'll kind of update you as we go.
Yeah.
Lamar Jackson, he has a sprained PCL, which is a 1 to 3 week injury. So that was kind of in line of what we thought, kind of coming into the week, but now it's kind of confirmed that he does have a PCL and, he'll be out. It's possible that he's out for a couple of weeks. If you picked up Tyler Huntley, you could start him this week and you could start him over the next couple of weeks as well, potentially. 1 quarterback leagues, and then in 2 quarterback leagues, if you landed them, you're feeling pretty good about that.
Yeah. I wouldn't expect much contribution for the rest of the regular season, at least from Lamar. I don't think even when he does come back, that's a knee injury. It's something that's going to hurt his mobility a little bit. And he already wasn't running as much as he has been these past 2 seasons. He hasn't been that big of a threat that we've come to know him to be these past few games. So he's been middling in his production the past few weeks, even, being healthy. But now that he's injured, I'm not expecting too much. I'm hoping that Tyler Huntley just kind of stays in now and the rest of the way stays healthy, because if I have Lamar and I picked up Tyler Huntley, I think if Lamar goes back in, he could have some quiet weeks because he was pretty quiet, anyway, going into this injury before he was, banged up.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see him not running as much, and if he doesn't run, it's going to get ugly. I would think
very bad. We'll see. We'll see. I'm not sure. We'll have to see because Tyler Huntley. I'm just thinking about if him starting, that could affect the receivers. Do you think the receivers maybe get a little upgrade? I don't know. Like we'll have to see how it goes. Sometimes quarterback change can be,
I mean, it can't be a downgrade.
Yeah, no, can't. So that's why I was like, Devin Duvernay. Maybe Devin Duvernay. I don't know. We'll have to see.
Mark Andrews.
Well, yeah, we know Mark Andrews. We
Mark Andrews can potentially get an upgrade. Devin Duvernay can get an upgrade. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, Duvernay was peppered a little bit last week from Huntley. We'll see if that continues. We also saw him get peppered by Lamar a few weeks ago. Then the next game he had like one catch. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
Jerry Jones said that he's not confident at all in OBJ's knee. It's not looking like OBJ is really going to make an impact for fantasy this year. If you have him in redraft, I don't think I'll be holding on to him. Like, just drop him. He's 50% roster and sleeper right now. I just don't see it with him.
Yeah, it doesn't look like if it's not the Cowboys, it's not going to be anybody else. It's not just a Cowboys issue. They're not like, oh, well, we don't want to pay him because he's a little banged up. It's the injury situation is to the point where it's going to keep him from being on the field. So I think drop him. Even if you do get any starts out of him, he's not going to help you unless it's like, and this is like on the off chance he starts, it would be in the fantasy championship maybe. I mean,
I'm not even sure what the point is. Like, what's the point?
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying. Even if he helps you in the playoffs a little bit, like, what's the point?
Yeah, I mean, unless you have a receiver that goes down these next few weeks and you need someone like you're in playoff position, like there's no reason. Like either fantasy or real life.
I'm talking about
life.
Yeah, like in real life. Like, what's the point of the Cowboys? Like, what's the point of the Cowboys signing him? To be honest with you, like,
there's not any.
Gallup is fine.
Yeah, Gallup's fine. CeeDee Lamb's fine. Dalton Schultz is fine. The offense is working as is. It would just be a luxury ad, which Dallas doesn't usually do. But I saw a post somewhere. I think it was in the comment section of one of the fan pages. They're like, there was a report that said Jerry Jones was willing to get uncomfortable with, the contract length, the contract amount that he would sign prospectively, sign OBJ for. And someone said, man, if only he was that willing to get uncomfortable with Amari Cooper when he was still in town. It's like, yeah, that makes sense because the cap space that they had going into the season was exactly what they would have needed to retain Amari. So it makes no sense. We'll have to see. But there's no reason for anyone to really pick up OBJ at this point because you're not going to help him in the regular season. And then with Dallas, like you said, like there's no point. There's no need. Like they would be better off going to get a corner than they would going to get OBJ.
Agreed. Let's get into our quarterback rankings. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. I have Jalen Hurts here at number 1 against the Giants this week because Josh Allen goes up against the Jets. Patrick Mahomes goes into Denver. Hurts hasn't played the Giants yet this year, but I think it's a matchup he can do pretty well in. The last time Josh Allen went up against the Jets, he did relatively well from a fantasy standpoint, so not really worried about him. And Mahomes, didn't do well against Cincinnati last week, so will it be 2 down performances for him in a row, in a tough matchup? We'll see.
It's possible.
It's possible. So I do have Hurts at 1, Josh Allen at 2. I have Joe Burrow ahead of Mahomes this week at number 3. He's at home. He's going up against Cleveland. He has all of his weapons. His last 3 games with Jamar Chase in the lineup and all of his weapons there, 32 fantasy points, 39 fantasy points, and 30 fantasy points. And that's 4-point pass touchdown scoring. That looks like 6-point passing touchdown scoring. But no, it's 4-point passing touchdown scoring. So, like I don't think that's too crazy. Obviously, you're starting these guys regardless in a regular league. But, if I had to nitpick it, I think I'm going Burrow over Mahomes this week.
I think that makes total sense. And there's an argument, I think, at this point, like you said, with Jamar Chase in lineup, to put Joe Burrow at QB1. I mean, the Giants, they're an all right matchup. They're not a bad defense. And Jalen Hurts divisional games tend to get a little, uglier than other games. We'll see how it goes. And I'm not saying Jalen Hurts isn't going to do well because he's obviously been fantastic for fantasy. And Josh Allen, same thing. He can win or lose a game and still have a good fantasy output. But the way Joe Burrow plays, he is completely independent of rushing production, which makes him super sustainable and super consistent. When he throws and when he's throwing the ball, that's how he's making his money. That's what he's doing every down. with the weapons that he has and the way that the offense is playing, and the same thing, they're getting some good matchups against, competitive teams. There's no reason to think he can't finish as a QB1. And I actually had a post that went out over the offseason that said Joe Burrow could challenge realistically for the QB1 spot. Obviously, overall, that clearly hasn't happened because, rushing quarterback still reigns supreme. But this production, independent of rushing, just makes him like one of the best fantasy quarterbacks in terms of, week-to-week reliability. And the floor is super duper high because of that. And the ceiling's high too. But with 30 points, in each of the past 3 games with Ja'Marr Chase, I think you could put him at 1 this week. The way the other matchups that these guys have are falling, I think it could make sense.
Yeah, but I'll say this though. Like, he has been in those big games, he's scored a rushing touchdown in each of those games. So,
right.
We have to kind of depend on him rushing in for a touchdown opposed to maybe Jalen Hurts, just rushing for like 60, 70 yards, and like that.
Yeah, that is what it comes down to.
What's more likely for me, and I'll go with Hurts there. And then Allen, he had a good game too against the Jets last time around. And like, I don't know, like it's just tough. He has that rushing ability too, more likely to score a rushing touchdown, probably Josh Allen, even though Burrow has been doing it a lot this season. So yeah, like all 3 of these guys, could potentially do their thing. And Mahomes, it kind of sucks if you're trying to make the playoffs and you're hoping for a 30-point game from Mahomes. Probably not going to happen this week, but if anyone is able to do it against Denver, it would be Mahomes. If he throws 3 touchdowns against Denver at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised because he's the man.
Yeah.
I got Herbert at number 5 here, at Tua at number 6, respectively. So they're going up against each other this week, and this has a chance of being a shootout. This is going to be a good game, man. I'm curious to see how the Dolphins choose to attack here. And we'll get into the running back rankings a little bit later in this episode. But, are they going to try to go run heavy against the Chargers' really, really soft run defense? Or are they just going to stick to what they do best and use their weapons? Because either way, they have matchups to exploit in this one.
Oh, yeah. They have matchup advantage against the Chargers defense by a mile. Almost everybody has matchup advantages against the Chargers defense. We saw that happen with Devontae Adams. That's not a good defense, so they allow a lot of fantasy points to other teams. And I like this matchup, because it's 2 high-powered offenses, and Justin Herbert's playing much better as of late. I like this matchup both ways. I think Justin Herbert gets the edge just a little bit because, he's more of a big play threat, I'd say, than, Tua is, even though Tua has Tyreek Hill in them. But they've kind of cooled down. They haven't been using the receivers as much. I know Tyreek Hill had a relatively big game last week, but before that, it was kind of middle of the pack. We'll see how it goes, but I think both of these guys are right in the same tier. I don't have anything against Tua, and I don't have anything against Herbert. I know I'm actually a big fan of Herbert, so I think it makes sense to have him over Tua in this matchup. But both of them, I think, have that capability. This could be a humongous game. They could each go for 25-plus fantasy points.
I can see it. I have Kyler Murray at number 7. Listen, man, like before the bye, you saw what he did. He looked good, and it just so happened to happen when he had all of his weapons, right? Rondale Moore went down, but then Greg Dortch kind of just stepped in, right? And I think Kyler Murray's trending up a little bit right now, right? They're out of the bye. We saw that big game before the bye. Not overly worried, about New England, especially since this game is in Arizona. But I think with Hopkins there, with Hollywood there, Rondale Moore's going to be back eventually. Greg Dortch potentially this week. I think Kyler Murray, I was surprised to see him run as much as he did, before the bye with that hamstring injury that he had. Like, I was not expecting that. I thought he would be limited a little bit and not run it. So it seems like it was a pretty minor hamstring injury for him to be only out, like, what was it, a week? He was out for, and then
I think it was 2 games.
Was it 2?
Yeah.
He came back and he was just like running like he normally does. Maybe his strides are so small that like he doesn't even use his hamstring.
Right, maybe. He just bends at the knee and he gets propelled forward. No, I hear you. He did miss 2 weeks, and you're right that it probably was a minor ankle injury. I bet he could have played that second week, but it looks like they made the right decision then in waiting that extra week to bring him back, because this was even good, like you said, going into the bye. They easily could have just took it easy on him and not drawn up any run plays, and he could have taken it easy on himself, and not run as much as he did. But he looked good. He looked like the Kyler Murray we drafted him to be, which we hadn't seen pretty much all season. So that was really good. Of course, they go right into the bye after that. So hopefully the momentum can carry over. But like you said, he has all his weapons. DeAndre Hopkins is there. Marquise Brown is healthy. And he could have had an even bigger day last week. If you notice last week, the last time they played, obviously it was against the Chargers. The offense kind of stalled on the last 3 drives. They had like 3 chances and they went 3 and out in all those drives. If they take one of those, and move the ball with it somehow, he could have had an even bigger output. So I love Kyler Murray going into this week. I do think he falls kind of below Tua and Justin Herbert and, the rest of the usual suspects at the top, just because Tua and Justin Herbert have that perfect matchup. And New England's defense is a little bit stingy, but I think Kyler Murray can get it done because this offense matches up well with the playmakers on the Patriots defense. Because trust me, this Cardinals offense, they have a ton of weapons.
Geno Smith, I have him at 8 against Carolina. If they don't have their primary running backs for this game, they might just put the ball in Geno's hands and let him cook. He's been cooking all year. Him and Tua have been, 2 of the most accurate quarterbacks this year. And have been 2 of the most efficient quarterbacks this year.
Yeah.
I'm pausing there because I'm getting phone calls. I'm trying to
fine.
trying to figure out what I'm doing here.
Yeah, that's been the name of Geno's game, this season, just being efficient. But he's also been a playmaker. He has playmaking tendencies at times, and he's also just been super efficient on top of that. So you don't have to worry about Geno Smith. He's one of the safest starts, I think, especially going against Carolina. They do have a decent defense, but it seems like Geno Smith is capable of getting it done against anybody. He's not really dependent on any type of matchup. He's going to have a good game regardless. And with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett playing the way that they are, I'm not worried about him. Like you said, especially if this goes into a game where they're leaning away from the run. Like, this could be a high volume passing game for Geno Smith, and that bodes well for his fantasy prospects.
Kirk Cousins at 9 against Detroit. I have Goff at 11. This definitely is a game to target this week. It's why we can feel relatively confident in starting guys like DJ Shark. This is one of many TJ Hawkinson revenge games. But the Lions are allowing the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this year and over the last 4 weeks as well. And the Vikings are allowing the 7th most fantasy points to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks, including the most passing yards to opposing quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks and over the course of the season as well. So if you look at what Preciser has as the over-under for this game, it's sitting at 53 point. It's sitting at a 53 point over-under with Detroit actually winning this game by 3 points. That's interesting. But another potential close and high scoring game. Now, hey man, they did blow out the Lions since they came out of the bye. They've been looking good, man. They were very close with Buffalo, right? They almost won that game.
They could have.
They blew out Jacksonville as they should have, as good teams should last week, right? And now, this is going to be a close game, man. And I think this is a division game too. It's in Detroit, so this is going to be a close one.
I think if the Vikings would win this, it would be a clinch scenario because last week they were waiting on a loss from Detroit to clinch the AFC North, not NFC North. So I don't know. Maybe the Packers have something to play with it. I just saw that last week. That's what they needed. It was one of the simplest ones, and it's super early. But there's a lot at stake in this game. And like you said, the Lions have looked really good. I mean, obviously they've played the Jaguars, and then those kind of games. They did blow them out though, so that's something. These are 2 defenses that are still bad. The Vikings, I think, more so than the Lions, which is funny to think about because this Lions defense was really bad to start the season. But I think the Vikings at this point in the season, they're allowing a lot of points, fantasy points across the board, quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, wide receivers. They're just letting it up. So I would definitely be targeting players from this game, definitely. Like guys, like you said, DJ Chark, if they're on the wire, and starting everybody that you can, unless it's like, Alexander Madison.
I'll start him. I'm kidding.
You can start Madison? I was going to say, there's no way.
No.
Unless something would happen to Cook. No, but don't start Madison this week just because he is a handcuff. That's all he is right now.
In between these 2 guys, I have Tyler Huntley in Pittsburgh at 10. He doesn't have too many weapons outside of Mark Andrews, as we were talking about earlier, but he'll make do with what he has. He'll likely stay efficient, similar to what he did last week. He has some rushing ability. Perfectly fine start for someone, who's missing Lamar Jackson this week.
Yeah, he's going to be able to fill in for you just fine. Like I said, the production that Lamar's been putting up, Tyler Huntley's perfectly capable of matching that, even exceeding it. We'll see how it goes. He's been pretty good for fantasy purposes in relief of Lamar Jackson in the past, and I'm not worried about it against Pittsburgh. They're not a crazy hard matchup for him. It's a divisional game. He'll be able to do his thing. So I think having him here at 10 makes sense. He has the upside with his legs. It might not be quite what Lamar Jackson offers, but who knows? Maybe he runs a little bit more. We'll have to see. But yeah, he's definitely in a tier above the other guys where you start getting into that streamer territory, but he's definitely lower than the rest. where, you have guys like Kyler Murray and Tua and Joe Burrow residing.
Like I mentioned, I had Goff at 11, and then I have Dak Prescott at 12 against Houston. Teams haven't really had to pass the ball a ton against Houston, and they also just haven't been giving up fantasy points to quarterbacks, the second least given up in the NFL this year.
Right.
Prescott has been solid. He hasn't really needed to show much of a ceiling lately. They've just been killing teams. But and I think this is going to be another example of that. And you'll see my running back rankings and where I have Pollard and Zeke. But Prescott, I think it's going to be that type of game where the running backs just completely take over. And they've been that team. They play defense and they run the ball.
Yeah, they're not asking Dak to do much, and that shouldn't be the case against the Texans. This on paper looks like a super high scoring team going up against a super low scoring team. A bad defense that allows a bunch of points. That looks good on paper, yes. But when you get into the game, if Dallas goes up quick, as teams have, like Miami went up 30-0, a couple weeks ago, if Dallas would go up by 2 or 3 touchdowns right out the gate, there's no reason to have Dak throwing the ball all over the place. It's going to be a run-based game. So I think you have to temper expectations a little bit. And this whole season, Dak has been pretty much, just an efficient quality starter. He hasn't had a super high ceiling. He hasn't had a low floor. He's been good for about 16 to 18 points for you this season, at least since he's come back from that injury. Obviously, the first week was an outlier. But outside of that, you shouldn't have expectations too high or low for Dak. You know what you're getting starting him. He's a QB2, a high-end QB2 with a low-end QB1 upside, just because of the way this offense operates. It's a run game. It's a ground first. So I think that him this low might feel weird with the matchup that he has, but I think this is appropriate.
Agreed. Trevor Lawrence at 13, fine spot start against Tennessee. They've given up the 4th most fantasy points to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks and over the course of the season as well. So he is a solid start. Like, a lot of people were starting him last week. He was okay, but we were hoping for a more competitive game against Detroit, and, he would have had a better day because of it. Hopefully he's all good. It doesn't seem like that knee injury did not look good during the game. Like when he got hurt, when he got hit and he was going down, I was like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
Like this offense is in trouble.
It was more than it was like, ugh. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like,
no, it's true.
It was a bad injury. It looked like it was going to be bad.
It looked bad. And he came back in the game and looked okay. He started scrambling around and all that. So it looks like he'll be fine. So I'm okay starting Trevor Lawrence this week against Tennessee. Are you still starting Dak over Trevor? Yes, right? A little more reliable.
The matchup, it's perfect. Dak's going to be able to get it done when he does throw it. It's just the volume thing that concerns me because, it could be a run game first. Trevor Lawrence against Tennessee, it is a divisional game, but we'll see. We have to see which version of the Jaguars show up. The one that beat the Ravens or the one that got blown out by the Lions.
And which version of the Tennessee defense, too.
That's true. Yeah, because they looked bad last week. And granted, it was against A.J. Brown in a revenge game, but, we'll have to see.
By the way, speaking of A.J. Brown in the revenge game, the Titans fired their GM yesterday.
That's a little tidbit. That's interesting, man.
2 days after A.J. Brown tore them up. And the timing is super interesting. I don't buy, like, I know it's funny to talk about, and it is really funny to talk about that this happened right after A.J. Brown tore them up. But, like, he just signed an extension in, I think it was February?
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. But I guess that was before the A.J. Brown trade, right? And all that. So, it's pretty interesting.
The timing, like you said, is what's really odd. And you don't want to hang around on this topic too long. But the thing about it is, like, why would you do that mid-season? Like, you got to be pretty damn bad to do that to your own guy, the GM. Like, that's pretty bad.
Usually, GMs get fired after the draft. And because throughout the entire season, they're preparing for the draft. So it seems to me like they don't want him to trade any more of their best players during the draft.
Yeah, he was rubbing his hands together, looking at Derrick Henry, or maybe, I don't know, who else do they have? I mean, do they have any money?
I mean, trading Derrick Henry would probably be a smart move if he's able to pull it off. But outside of that, like, who else would they?
Jeffrey Simmons is really the only other guy I could think, drawing significant interest. I mean, you're not trading Ryan Tannehill unless the trade deadline's off. You're not going to be able to get much for any of the players on that roster. Robert Woods, you're not moving. You just drafted Treylon Burks to replace A.J. Brown, who just beat your ass. So, the timing was weird, but what
would have been interesting if Treylon Burks never got that concussion, caught that touchdown, and then went off to have a huge
he had a game.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked like he was going to be on his way
for him.
yeah, maybe he doesn't get fired. I mean, I think it would have been much more competitive, obviously. Like, even without this whole firing thing going on, it looked like, I think it's pretty obvious that they were shorthanded at receiver and that Treylon Burks was going to be a difference maker in that game. It wouldn't have been 35-10. It might have been like 35-24. I still think the Eagles win that game, but it wouldn't have gone down the way it did, to the point where you're firing your GM a couple days afterwards.
My guess is that it had more to do than that. Like, I can't even talk right now. I think it has more. It has to be more to that firing.
Yeah, obviously,
that would be a weird. That would be a weird emotional decision to make by an owner if that were the case.
I said that's what everyone chalks it up to, and it looks bad. But you do a little reading on it. We'll see what comes out these next few days.
Yeah,
we digress.
Exactly. I'm sure Schefter will have something on it on Sunday, at least.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Derek Carr at 14 against the Rams. The Rams' passing defense has been pretty bad lately. They've given up the second most passing yards over the last 4 weeks. They've given up 8 passing touchdowns as well during that span, which is the most in the NFL. During that span, we expect Carr to be solid this week, which means he won't.
Yeah, that's the thing. Expectations are not a good thing with Derek Carr. But you're right. You're right about the Rams defense being bad. Geno Smith just flayed him up and served him rack of ram. You know what I'm saying? With DK Metcalf and
rack of ram.
They both had some.
Zach.
They both had some big games. So we'll have to see how it goes. I would expect Derek Carr and Devontae Adams to do their things. Obviously Devontae Adams and Jalen Ramsey is going to be, get your popcorn out for that one, because DK Metcalf and Jalen Ramsey, and then Devontae Adams versus Jalen Ramsey back-to-back the same week within 5 days, even on Thursday night. We'll see how that goes. I expect Devontae Adams to win a few matchups there. So as long as Devontae Adams is doing his thing, I think you can rely on Derek Carr. And I'd much rather rely on Devontae Adams than Derek Carr getting it done.
Rack of ram.
Rack of ram. That was Geno Smith. Delay. Shink. You know what I'm saying? Shink. With the knife. He was cutting him up.
Daniel Jones against Philly at 15. He's been solid, really regardless of the matchup. At 16, I have Mike White in Buffalo. Buffalo has given up 7 passing touchdowns over the last 4 weeks, and the 5th most passing yards over the last 4 weeks as well. And the last 4 quarterbacks they went up against: Mac Jones, Jared Goff, Jacoby Brissett, and Kirk Cousins. So it wasn't like, any like superstar quarterbacks doing it, right? So Mike White, I think he can get it done as a solid quarterback too this week.
Yeah, and you think about it, like Mike White, he's actually like Mr. Passing Yardage. He's like the anti-Zach Wilson. He throws for a lot of yards. He throws it a lot.
Has he hit 700 yards in the past 2 games?
I think he's just short. 315 yards and 369 yards, 3 touchdowns over those past 2 games. Obviously, all 3 of those came against Chicago, but he still got it done last week against Minnesota without any touchdowns. So I like his odds, against Buffalo to have another good game. I wouldn't be surprised if he hits 300 again, because these weapons, like you said, Garrett Wilson's coming on. Elijah Moore is starting to get worked in a little bit. The offense looks good. It's not like this is a bad offense where you put a quarterback in and they're going to set up to fail. Mike White elevates his offense a little bit, which is funny to think about, but that's what he does. He's going to be able to produce for you every week. So I think that's good. I like Mike White at 16. I'd be tempted to put him over Daniel Jones, because Philly is a tough game. It's a tough matchup, and he doesn't have a whole lot of weapons. So I might consider one New York quarterback over the other. Mike White over Daniel Jones this week.
Okay, I can see it. Oliver Blue, thanks for the YouTube comment. Rack of ram. Oliver prefers ram over rice. Huh?
Yeah,
love it. I love it.
That's pretty funny.
I prefer mixed over rice. I'm a New Yorker. I'll take mix over rice instead of chicken over rice, lamb over rice. Lamb over rice, I've been really feeling crazy, but like mix over rice is what I prefer. But ram over rice, I gotta try that. I love it.
I was about to say rack of lamb, but then I was like, man, that would be CD lamb. So then I said rack of ram. That one came to my head. So that's pretty funny. I don't know.
Did you think of that on the spot, Zach?
That was on the spot. I didn't have that prepared or anything. It's not like sitting over here on my desk or something. So
that's why we keep you around.
Yeah, that's where you get the talent. See, the talent's coming out. Finally making a contribution to this podcast, right?
Finally.
Finally, about time. All I do is pick apart your rankings.
That's it. I wouldn't blame anyone if they wanted to start Mac Jones ahead of Mike White either, or Daniel Jones, to be honest with you, because he's going up against Arizona. They've been really bad this year, and they've allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Specifically, they've allowed 24 passing touchdowns, which is the most in the NFL allowed. So Mac Jones did really well against Minnesota a couple weeks ago in a really, really good matchup, and this is another really, really good matchup. So Mac Jones is a streamer. I think he can get it done. He was really frustrated last week, but it was a very tough matchup for him.
Yeah.
But I think this week he can potentially get it done. This is probably the highest I've ever had Mac Jones.
Yeah, I think it might be the highest. I don't think he's ever cracked the top 15, but he's pretty close this week. I think Mac Jones, I would keep him under Daniel Jones. I would keep him under Mike White.
I have him ahead of Deshaun Watson.
The matchup makes sense. I think that makes sense for the matchup specifically. That's why it makes sense to have Mac Jones over Deshaun Watson this week, because Deshaun Watson's going against a pretty good Cincinnati defense, and Deshaun Watson, as we know, his balls have the balls that he throws. I should say. Pause. But the balls that he throws.
I was gonna say, what about Deshaun Watson?
They got the gravity. They got the gravity turned on like twice as strong, because they were just hitting the ground in front of the receivers like by 5 yards.
Oh my god!
I caught myself there. We're good. We're chilling.
So do those masseuses.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need to see more, from Deshaun Watson before I can start him.
Yeah.
I didn't like what I saw last week. Look what Cincinnati just did to Patrick Mahomes last week, right? Like, and now you want Deshaun Watson to go into Cincinnati and do okay. I'm gonna wait and see. Personally, like, I'm not. Listen. I keep going back to it. It's like, I know what people are thinking. If you have Deshaun Watson, it's like, what have I been stashing this guy for? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like, if you stash him for a couple weeks, like, I started putting him on my waiver wire rankings like a couple weeks ago. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's not that long, because you know what the upside is. But for the whole season, if you were doing that, I'm not going to dwell on it too much longer. But I'm just saying, like, that's not a reason to start him. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, it's just like, look at your options this week and just go with your best guy.
Yeah, you can
and I don't think Deshaun Watson will be that guy. I agree.
Deshaun Watson isn't that guy right now, and he might not be for the rest of the season. So
now,
I think Go ahead.
I was going to say, I have Ryan Tannehill and Tom Brady at 19 and 20. Would you start them over Deshaun Watson this week?
Tom Brady's tough. I want to say yes, but the offense wasn't necessarily inspiring against the Saints, and then they're going against San Francisco's defense. So I don't know if I would necessarily do that. Deshaun Watson might have a little bit more upside than him, but it's just by a hair. And Ryan Tannehill, I think maybe I would. I think Ryan Tannehill is a safer bet this week than Deshaun Watson, because Cincinnati's defense, like I said, has been playing pretty good as of late. They made Patrick Mahomes uncomfortable. Imagine what they're going to do to a guy with one game of experience, and they didn't even score a touchdown in that game against the Texans.
I get that. Okay. Let's move on to the running back rankings. I have Austin Eckler at number 1 this week against Miami. We saw what Christian McCaffrey did against them last week. I think it could be a similar outcome for Eckler this week. I think this is a really, really good matchup for him. Josh Jacobs at 2 against the Rams. He's about to fillet another rack of ram against them. Did I do that right, Zach? I couldn't do it as good as you.
You got it.
All right. Okay. Not bad. Okay. And then I got Christian McCaffrey at 3. We talked about the ridiculous usage that he had last week without Elijah Mitchell there. The knee doesn't seem to be an issue for him. So it seems like these 3 guys are like the locked in top 3 going forward, assuming their usage doesn't change a whole lot. It's funny. Like every week we think we have a locked in top 3, top whatever. And like every week it changes. But for now, it seems like these 3 are probably the locked in top 3 moving forward for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think that is going to be the case. Like you said, it's the 3-headed monster right now with Eckler, Jacobs, and McCaffrey. I think you could put them in pretty much any order and have a case for any of them as the number 1 running back for each week. Austin Eckler, I think, is the one this week, like you said, because of his matchup, which Christian McCaffrey did really well with last week. And Austin Eckler is, I think, one of the premier. I think he's challenges Christian McCaffrey for the best pass catching running back right now. So we'll see how that goes. And Josh Jacobs, he's just been on a tear. He's getting it done. As long as he continues to get his usage, he'll be good. And Christian McCaffrey, Tampa Bay it's not a fantastic defense, but it's not anything to sneeze at. They're going to be able to, do some things, especially with Brock Purdy at quarterback. It remains to be seen how they perform against a defense that's just a little bit better than Miami. The only guy that I could see maybe challenging, for this top 3, maybe make it a 4-headed monster at the top instead of 3, would be Saquon Barkley, but we haven't seen him get that usage or have that production in a few weeks where he was being ranked that high. So I think he could challenge, down the stretch with the Giants hopefully being competitive in their games the rest of the way. But I don't see him, maybe making that jump anytime soon, especially with Philly this week. But I think in the future we could see him kind of move up the rankings a little bit, because he's been pretty low these past few weeks, and you caught some shade for that.
I hope so, because he's been really inefficient, right?
Yeah.
And like that's his issue, right? Like all these other running backs are extremely efficient, and Barkley hasn't, and unless he's getting a stupid amount of volume that can mask that inefficiency, he's going to be ranked as a low end RB1 from here on out, and we'll get to
Well,
him in a second. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
you
Go
talk.
ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Just while we're on it, and if you want me to wait, I can wait.
Let's
But
let's talk about it right now.
yeah,
I have him at number 9.
with Saquon, you talk about that stupid volume. This inefficiency has only happened after he got that stupid volume against Houston. We had 35 carries, and then since then he hasn't topped 20 carries in the game, which maybe that's a reason. You think they overused him? You think they wore him out a little bit there?
I
I
don't
mean,
know, maybe,
as
but
an NFL
gonna
running back,
say
that shouldn't happen. But go ahead.
it's true. As somebody, especially like him, right,
Yeah,
who has the pedigree to be able to handle a huge workload, and he has, he's been doing his thing, like, but yeah, like the inefficiency is my issue. Like he had 23 touches for 81 yards last week. That's 3.5 yards a touch, and that includes 5 catches. So
yeah,
that shouldn't be that low. First of all, you shouldn't have that low of a yards per carry. Second of all, you shouldn't, and I'm not blaming Saquon here, right? I'm talking about the whole, like all of the production. The production includes what he does, what his offensive line does, like all of it, produces that output.
right.
If he was behind a better offensive line, would he be doing better? Hell yeah. If he was on a better offense, he would kill it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like put him
we've been
in
saying
on
that
the
his whole
put
career.
him on the 49ers right now.
He'd be doing Christian
Like
McCaffrey. Yeah,
maybe better. Maybe better. You know what I'm
maybe.
saying? Like I maybe, like he's a great talent. So like
Maybe the 49ers is a bit of a bad spot because, they tend to do this thing where one week it looks like they're going to have a lead back and then the next they have a
I guess,
committee.
okay,
But
no,
you know what
how
I'm
about this?
saying?
What I mean by that is
We're overanalyzing a little bit. Yeah,
the Christian McCaffrey role that he has right now,
right. Mm-hmm.
like give him that role on that team. Like just what he had last week, for
Yeah, it's
example.
fine. It's
You know what I'm
also,
saying? Like he would
yeah,
kill it.
because it's on a better offense. Like the Giants' offense isn't one that's going to stay on the field a whole lot. They're really just shot at receiver. They don't have anybody on the outside that's really going to challenge, except maybe Darius Slayton, the defenders on the other side. So that definitely plays a role. The game script then becomes more important because if it's not Saquon doing his thing, they're not doing anything on offense. He's been able to get it done. I still think he's, like we have him ranked as the RB9. He's definitely still an RB1, but that ceiling just isn't there. And you're right. If we see that crazy volume again, he can get back up there. And I think that's perfectly well within reach. That's within his range of outcomes for the rest of these 4 or 5 games down the stretch. But we have to see that before we start ranking him that high. So that's just a little, defense. Coming to your fence, kind of saying that he could move up for having him as low as we did last week.
Yeah, I mean, he moved up like 4 spots from where he
Yeah.
was last week. And,
Right.
And that's because I like the matchup a little bit better than I did last week. But, 23 touches for 81 yards, not great, but he scored. So that's great. And if you play in PPR, full PPR, they're very solid. Last week was his first 5-catch game since week 1, right? And the hope is that he continues to catch passes out of the backfield to mask that inefficiency that he's had over the last few weeks. Hopefully his offensive line starts to get a little bit healthier too. That could make a huge difference as well. I'm hoping that, if Philly does go up in this game, this is a division game. It could be close. But if Philly does go up, the hope is that, he starts getting peppered a little bit more in the pass game. 5 catches, like that's really what propelled him in this game, and the touchdowns.
5
what
catches
he did on the ground was huge.
5 catches will benefit any fantasy player, regardless of position, receiver or, running back. 5 catches is a recipe for at least a serviceable day, especially PPR. Obviously standard is a different story, but PPR, that makes a big difference.
But yeah, 5 catches for 18 yards, 4 catches for 13 yards. Yeah,
not efficient.
We need a little bit more, from that. Yeah. So I have Derrick Henry here at number 4. Going back to where we were, we had Eckler at 1, Jacobs at 2, McCaffrey at 3, Henry at 4 against Jacksonville. He might get like 400 yards against these guys. Like I can totally see, him having one of those big, heavy workload type of days, but we'll see. Maybe the Jaguars can keep it competitive and maybe they can kind of sustain some drives. That would be key, for him as well. And that was part of the reason why I have Etienne. You'll see Etienne's out of this top 10. That was one of the issues that I had there. And we'll get to Etienne in a second. But I want to talk about Rhamondre Stevenson real quick. Rhamondre Stevenson's usage last week without Damian Harris was bonkers, right? And that's why I have him at 5. But to be honest, like even if Damian Harris plays, like I'm gonna still have him at 5. It's a great matchup against Arizona. Last week without Damian Harris, 98% of snaps. He ran a route on 89% of dropbacks. That's bonkers. League winning running back right here. Like he's getting
absolutely.
you to the playoffs all year, and he's going to be a big part of you winning the whole damn thing.
Yeah. And just you think about it, obviously you could talk about the value, on that you would have gotten from him, especially with where he's probably drafted for you on your team. But just the way that he's playing, this offense can score 10 points, it could score 26 points, it could score 30 points, whatever it is. He's going to get it done for you. And that's what's kind of been the biggest standout thing for me with Rhamondre Stevenson is that he's matchup proof and also game script proof because he just gets the targets regardless of whether they're winning, they're losing, they're in a neutral game script. He just gets the targets, and that's been, buoying his production. He hasn't been awesome or as good as he has been these past couple of weeks on the ground, but definitely has that potential in him. Like we said, the touchdown regression should be coming with him. He hasn't scored in a little while, so we'll see how that affects him moving forward. It can only be a good thing if he scores. And then just going back on, like you said, with Derrick Henry, in his past 2 healthy games against the Jaguars, he hasn't played them yet this season. But the one game that he played last year, before he went down with the injury, he had 3 touchdowns and 130 yards. And then the game before that in 2020, he had that 215-yard performance. I think that's when he had that 99-yard touchdown. So just remember who he's playing against. This is still Derrick Henry. Obviously, he was shut down a little bit last week against Philly, but this Jacksonville defense isn't going to give him as much trouble at all. I think he's in line for a really good day, like you said. So it makes sense to have him at 4. And he's kind of been locked into this 4 spot underneath the other guys just because he's a safe start. And he has upside, but not like the other guys because of their receiving workload.
I have Tony Pollard at 6 this week. Even with Zeke back, Pollard, isn't really taking a back seat right now. He's still getting it done, and against Houston this week, oh my. Oh my. You have to play him. He's in your lineup, regardless of whoever you else have. You have Joe Mixon, start him over Mixon. You have Dalvin Cook, start him over Dalvin. You have Saquon, start him over Saquon. You have Nick Chubb, start him over Nick Chubb. I don't care. I want Pollard in my lineup this week.
I think absolutely. If he gets like 12 or 15 carries, which he's been getting, obviously last week it was a little bit lighter of a workload because Dallas went up in that fourth quarter. He essentially didn't have to do anything, after that fourth quarter. He scored that touchdown, but he's definitely in line for, like I said, if he gets 12 or 15 touches, I guarantee you he's going to have 100 yards on the ground because this Houston defense is bad and they're not good against the run. And that's what it's been for the Cowboys. It hasn't been the passing game. Obviously, we talk about CeeDee Lamb, he's looking good, but it's been the running backs that have been getting it done. And it's not just Tony Pollard that's startable this week. Zeke has some upside here too because they can ground and pound, or they can that with Zeke, or they can use a lightning with Tony Pollard. He's also a good pass catcher, so he has that upside working for him. I think it absolutely makes sense to have him this high. People might be a little upset at that because Zeke looks better. He's looked better as of late, but Tony Pollard, we know what he can do, and he's been very good these past few weeks, regardless of matchup.
Well, as a resident Zeke hater, I have him at 13 this week. The highest I've ever had him over the past 3 years. It's been a long, long time. But yeah, dude, like he's simply been getting it done every single week. He's been very consistent, and he's a solid RB2. There's no other way to say it. And this week he gets a bigger boost because he's going up against Houston.
Yeah, and he's been really good. Listen to these numbers. Against Philly he had 15 fantasy points. These are PPR, and then against Detroit he had 17. He missed 2 games plus a bye in between, but he came back. He had 17, 16, and 18. Like, what you're getting with him every week. And he scored at least 1 touchdown in all of those games. So he's not getting the receiving work. Tony Pollard obviously has been taking that, but he has a touchdown, floor. He's scoring at least 1 a week. The offense that Dallas has is just that good. They're in those positions, short fields. That's going to work in Ezekiel Elliott's favor too. I expect Dallas's defense to turn the ball over a couple more times. Take the ball from, I should say, Houston a couple of times. That's going to result in short fields, and that means all the running backs get to eat. And Zeke, he's been doing that these past few weeks.
Yeah. All right, let me circle back a little bit. I got Joe Mixon at 7, assuming that he's back.
We thought he would play last week, right?
We did. Listen, man, if he misses another game, this is super, it'll be a huge, what do you call it? It wouldn't be something that happens often. Yeah, that's the word that I'm looking for. It would be an outlier. Thank you, Zach.
I got you. But if Joe
that's
Mixon would miss,
that's why we keep you around.
if Joe Mixon would miss, would you say you could just slot Samaje Perine right in at 7? Like the way he's been playing, I think that makes perfect sense. He's been doing very well.
Yeah. That's exactly where he would go. That's 7. But yeah, I mean, Cleveland's been one of the worst rushing defenses in the NFL, right? And then I got Dalvin Cook at 8 against Detroit. I got Saquon at 9 against Philly. Nick Chubb at 10 against Cincy. But yeah, our Etienne. Yeah, go ahead.
Nick Chubb had a pretty disappointing game last week.
Very disappointing.
Because this was like a matchup for the ages. You know what I'm saying? As far as what he should have done. We had him ranked as the RB1 last week. And maybe it's because Deshaun Watson is quarterback. I want to, chalk it up to that, but he's just handing the ball off. So I was a little disappointed to see Nick Chubb. He didn't even get in the end zone, which surprised me a lot.
Oh man, it did. Yeah, it was very disappointing. The play calling was bad, but also what didn't help was the fact that the defense was scoring, the special teams was scoring. So the ball was out of that offense's hands a lot last week. True. But Deshaun Watson didn't help either. He didn't help sustain those drives at all.
Yeah.
I have Travis Etienne at 11. This is the lowest I've had him in a while. This is a very tough matchup though against Tennessee. My concern in this game, is not only that is a tough matchup, but if the Jaguars can't contain Derrick Henry, like will the Titans just dominate possession? Most of this game.
Could. Yeah.
Right. And the hope is that the Jaguars can score, maybe through the air a bit, move the ball, make this a competitive game. Vegas has the Titans favored by only 4 points. So, it's not terrible, right? Like if that stays the plan, like if that happens, like that would be great for Etienne. Also, it's like Etienne isn't extremely involved in the passing game. Like he's involved, but it's not like he's getting 5-6 targets a game. If he was, I might have him up a little bit higher, but this is kind of where I have to have him in a matchup like this. Now, with Etienne, that big playability is still there. And, you look at what he was doing before the bye, he was absolutely he was extremely efficient, right? He was taking 12 carries for 80 yards, right? And that can easily happen against any matchup. So I'm not, he's at 11 because the matchup isn't amazing. And he's had a couple of off games lately after the bye. But, he's due. And there's going to be a game coming up where he absolutely blows up. So it's going to happen, but this matchup, just temper expectations.
Yeah, I would temper expectations this matchup too. It's also confusing me. Do you think maybe the injury that he had is still lingering? I mean, I know they said he could come back in the last game, but he didn't get a humongous workload. Granted, they were down a lot, but
that's the reason. That's the reason. I mean, they were passing the ball a ton, but he was on the field for every snap. His workload was absolutely ridiculous in terms of his time on the field.
Yeah, so he hasn't slowed down in that sense. I'm just trying to piece it together because I thought even with them being in a negative game script, you think that would translate to more than 3 targets, which is what he got last week. Yeah, that was a little confusing. That I didn't.
It wasn't confusing to me because he's been running a ton of routes this year, but he just hasn't been targeted. Now, if you look back in the entire season, it's confusing because it's dude, this guy, is electric with the ball in his hands. Get him the ball. You know what I mean? That's the confusing part of it overall. I wasn't confused. I wasn't surprised that he didn't get a lot of targets in this game because he just simply wasn't getting targets the entire season when they've been down.
I think that's problematic when you have a guy like him in the back.
That's your boy, Trevor. That's your boy from Clemson, dude. You guys were crazy in the passing game. He caught so many balls and he was super efficient. So what's up. Get him the ball. On the year, he only has 8% target share. On a per route run basis, only 15%. That's not high. So, something I feel like they could do better. And that's part of the reason why Etienne, doesn't have as high of a floor as these other guys because of that. But we know what his ceiling is. And, we know he's like a DeAndre Swift type player, right? I have DeAndre Swift right under him at 12. He's back here as a low end RB1 against Minnesota. High scoring game. Minnesota has allowed the most fantasy points to running backs over the last 4 weeks. Swift is back in the role we drafted him for. We talked about him at length yesterday and the day before. So, he's back in, got to have him in your lineup territory.
Yeah. There's no reason not to have DeAndre Swift in your lineup anymore. Obviously a couple of weeks ago was a very different story, but we said last week we saw that little uptick, and then this past week, he went off. So he should be right back in that role. And like I said, this is where we would have had him all season, assuming he had this role if he was healthy, and nothing happened with the injury. But that you gotta like where DeAndre Swift is at as far as his workload goes. I think him as a low end RB1 makes sense. And I think that's, really what you can expect from him as a floor each week, as long as he stays healthy.
Agreed. I have Zeke at 13. Talked about him already. Miles Sanders at 14 against the Giants. James Conner at 15 against New England. Like, I was going back and forth between these two guys. Actually, I'm going to go Conner. Put Conner at 14 and Miles Sanders at 15. If Zeke didn't have a stupid good matchup this week, I would probably go Conner over Zeke as well. But yeah, like Conner just has a high floor, especially in PPR leagues. He can blow up. Like with his role that he has, like he's playing every snap. He's running around on every drop back. He has one of the best roles in the NFL right now, over the past couple of weeks. So, the Patriots haven't allowed a ton of fantasy points to running backs. However, his role trumps that. So he should be in lineups this week. I would play him over Sanders, higher floor, higher ceiling.
Yeah, Miles Sanders, he's had like 2 really good games this year, and then the rest of them he's just kind of been quiet. And that's not his fault. Jalen Hurts obviously having an MVP candidate at quarterback will limit your opportunity in the scoring department and yard racking up department, however you want to call that. But I just don't trust Miles Sanders on a week-to-week basis enough where, I feel like if you start him every week expecting what we saw last week, you're going to get burned a lot. It's that inconsistency that would, have me put Miles Sanders beneath James Conner, because James Conner's been the opposite. Maybe he doesn't have 30-point ceiling, but James Conner has a ceiling and the floor, like you said, to match, that are just a little bit higher than what Miles Sanders offers on a week-to-week basis in terms of consistency. I like James Conner as a consistent running back, consistent contributor. That's what I'm going for at this point, at running back. If he's your RB2, you're set. That's exactly what you need.
I got Jamal Williams at 16. Even though Swift had a few more carries, than Williams last week, it's really all about that goal line role for Williams. Like 20 or 30 more rushing yards, on the ground, like it's not going to make a huge difference, right? That's not why you were starting him to begin with,
Right.
So not so much has changed with him. So I'm starting Swift over Williams, but and that's assuming Swift's role doesn't change or get better, but that still doesn't mean that I won't be starting Jamal. Jamal literally has been at this spot around 16, over the past couple weeks.
Yeah, plus you have get tackled at the one machine, Amon-Ra St. Brown on that offense too. The rest of the offense is very good. So if Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to keep getting tackled at the one, Jamal Williams, he's going to have touchdowns delivered to him like DoorDash. So I think he's in line. You can still start him just because DeAndre Swift has come on. Jamal Williams isn't necessarily, a bad start anymore. It's not like you're just fading him out and he's not going to be a contributor for you. He has that goal line role still, which is super valuable in offense that, like we said, has been scoring a lot of touchdowns these past few weeks.
I got Raheem Mostert at 17. He was the flavor of the week for Mike McDaniel last week. And these running backs have a good matchup against the Chargers. So there is some upside here. I even have Jeff Wilson at 20. That might be a little bit high, but it's possible that we see a closer split this week, given how much the Dolphins might want to run the ball against this very vulnerable Chargers defense. There can be room for both. I think Jeff Wilson is really like a boom bust play. I think his floor is like 0, right? Because Mostert was very
saw that last week.
Favored last week. He was very favored, right? And that's true. Jeff Wilson did have a floor of 0 because but the thing with that is like they didn't run the ball that much at all. Like they just went pass heavy. I think they combined for less than 10 carries, if I'm not mistaken. But this week they could combine for like 35, right? That could happen this week. So that's part of the reason why I have both these guys in the top 20. But if I'm going to play one, it's definitely going to be Raheem Mostert right now.
Yeah, the 49ers defense will make you do some weird things. Even Mike McDaniel, you know what I'm saying? This offense has been good. It just looked like it was shut down. Nothing was working last week. I wouldn't pay too much attention to that. It was a bad performance by these guys. But I think even though their ceiling isn't what we'd seen the weeks before that, their floor is also not going to be that bad on a week-to-week basis. Like you said, especially in a matchup against the Chargers. Maybe season long you could worry about Jeff Wilson, but in a matchup against the Chargers, I think they're going to use them both. They're each going to get their touches to the point where they're going to be able to produce and be RB2s if you absolutely need them. I still like Jeff Wilson a little bit more. than Raheem Mostert. We'll see how that goes. Obviously, it's just been kind of, flip-flopping back and forth. But I trust Jeff Wilson, I think, a little bit more to be on the field than Raheem Mostert. We'll see how it goes. But
I'm
neither
just
of these
going to
guys
start. I'm
Go
just
ahead.
going to start whoever was getting more playing time the week before.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's one way to play it. That's one way to play, because momentum, I guess, does work. In this case with these backfields, it's always fluid. You never know who's going to get how many touches or whatever. But it's a good offense on a good in a good matchup. So I think you could start either of them and be just fine. I'm not expecting Jeff Wilson to put up 0.3 again like he did last week.
No. Zonovan Knight at 18 against Buffalo. I think regardless of whether Carter is back this week, I'm going to have him here. Not saying that Carter won't get touches, but just saying that I think Knight will get a similar workload regardless. And that's assuming there's rational coaching here. But we'll see. Like, I'm willing to take that shot, because I think there could be some upside. I think the Jets are going to score. I think they're going to move the ball. I think Zonovan Knight's going to be a big part of that. So, I'm assuming, it's very possible Carter doesn't play this week, but we'll see. Let's wait on that practice report. I'm gonna check on that right now.
Yeah, I think Zonovan Knight's a good play. Like you said, we're to the point where it doesn't look like Michael Carter's return is going to influence his workload as much. Regardless of who he's working against, he's going to be splitting it, but he's still going to get touches to the point where he's not being phased out. They're not going to lean heavy into Michael Carter and give him all the touches. Zonovan Knight's going to be on the field enough where he's going to get the workload to be producing at this, mid RB2 level like we have him ranked this week. And I think he can be that the rest of the way. And then maybe, they're continue to be impressed by Zonovan Knight. Maybe rest of the season, he could slide up in the rankings a little bit more just because he's looked pretty good in the games where he's played. Obviously, it's been with Mike White at quarterback. It remains to be seen how he would have played with Zach Wilson under center. But chances are it would have been not very well.
We have an update.
All right.
Michael Carter is going to be practicing in full today. And that means he's going to play. Yep. And Robert Saleh was asked about what that means for Bam Knight with Michael Carter back, and I quote, "He's not going anywhere." There you go. Okay, cool.
Michael Carter is not a take 70% of the snaps running back. He is
exactly
complementary. He'll work with Zonovan Knight, and they're both talented. Michael Carter can do his thing. It's just that Zonovan Knight has come on to the point where now you can use both of them, and you'll be good. So I think Zonovan Knight, I would leave him here. Does Michael Carter go up in the rankings for you at all?
No.
I think you don't think he's top 30 with Zonovan Knight at 18?
Let's see. That's a good question.
I know I'm putting you on the spot with this one, but
that's okay. I love it. That's what I live for, dude. That's what I love it, bro. That's what I do, bro. I would say, let's put Michael Carter above Latavius Murray. Let's put him above J.K. Dobbins. Let's put him above Devin Singletary. And we're talking full PPR here.
Yeah.
Do we want to put him above Cam Akers? Maybe. I would say around that 28 to 30 range. Yeah. I would say he's a solid RB3.
I think he's absolutely over Latavius Murray, absolutely over J.K. Dobbins, just because I think his workload's locked in. Obviously Latavius Murray, I guess you could say he has his workload locked in somewhat, but Mike Boone was playing a little bit last week, and obviously that Broncos offense is terrible. So I think it makes sense. You could slide him in right around there. I wouldn't put him over Deontay Foreman, but I think that makes sense.
Okay.
That's a good call.
Nice. Pacheco, I have him at 19 this week, against Denver. If the Chiefs are smart, I know they have Patrick Mahomes. I know they want to prove that he can get it done against any defense, but they will depend on the ground because that's how most teams move the ball against Denver. And there's a good chance that Pacheco can get some volume this week. So I do like him as a solid RB2 this week.
Yeah, I think he can get it done. He's looked like he's able to, do his thing against any team. It's not like it's going to be matchup dependent. He looks like he'll be able to get it done. He's still not going to have upside that's going to get me to the point where I'm ranking him higher than he is right now. I think this is as high as I would have him. It might be bordering on just a little bit too high, but we'll see. I'm not a humongous fan of his role just because it's very limited, especially with Jerick McKinnon getting a couple touches last week. That was a little interesting, but could be a week-to-week thing. I'm not buying too much into that. Just remains to be seen. I want to see him, have higher output in this offense because at the end of the day, it's still pass first. Patrick Mahomes is going to be doing the majority of the work in terms of fantasy lifting, this offense. So I'm okay with him here, but I'd temper expectations for him. It's Denver. They're not as good against the run as they are against pass, but I would temper expectations.
Top 20 play this week.
All right. We'll see.
I got Jeff Wilson at 20. like I mentioned before, Fournette at 21 against San Francisco. This is a tough matchup, right? But assuming you play in a full PPR league, Brady is going to dump it down to these guys. And I have Fournette higher than Rachaad White, who I have a few spots down at 24. And that's because Fournette played more snaps. He was a primary goal line guy. But if the usage is similar to last week, then there can be somewhere between 10 and 15 points because of those dump offs in PPR. Like if I play in a standard or half point league, like I'm a little bit, I'm going to rank these guys a lot lower because they're not going to be efficient on the ground. They haven't been so efficient on the ground. They weren't efficient on the ground last week. Well, Fournette was, but Rachaad White wasn't. But yeah, so I have Fournette a couple spots above him, but they're both, I would say, low end RB2s this week.
Yeah, it's been the story, for the Buccaneers running backs the whole season. They kind of just, beat each other up in terms of their production, and they're not going to be able to, break away from one another in terms of their usage and production. But I'm not a big fan of this matchup because we saw what the 49ers did to the Dolphins running backs, and the Dolphins running backs, they're not bad. They're not necessarily, I don't think, the level of Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White, but still definitely something to consider with their matchup. I think it makes sense to have them this low. I don't know if I'd have them higher in a neutral matchup. We'll see, because this offense still has looked bad. But I wouldn't expect too much from these guys this week, and I think that's why we have them this low.
Yeah, I think you're right. They would be around here regardless, I would say.
All right.
Yeah. James Cook is at 22 against the Jets. This is an upside play, honestly. Like it's possible that we see another 3-man backfield in terms of snaps like we saw last week. But who knows? Like, if Cook can lead this backfield again, then, he could do some things. The hope is that he does, and that he can gain a larger portion of the opportunities. He had 20 opportunities last week. Singletary had 15, but the hope is that there's a higher differential in this game moving forward if you're going to expect Cook to be someone that you can depend on every single week, right? There's not going to be 35 opportunities every week for these running backs. Like that's not what we're used to in this backfield. So, I have Singletary down here at 28. I'm probably moving him down to 29, moving Michael Carter up to 28. Given the fact that he's going to play this week. But I'm not, Singletary's only in the top 30 because he plays on a good offense. He's going to get probably like 40% of the snaps.
Yeah. And we've seen Devin Singletary kind of take that goal line role a little bit,
Yeah.
With Josh Allen, obviously, is a threat in the ground game to run in from that distance too. But when they hand it to running back, it's usually Devin Singletary. James Cook, This is definitely, like you said, an upside play. This is assuming and hoping that he can hold on some kind of role similar to what he got last week.
Look who I have him against ahead of, right? Like guys who don't have upside, like Dameon Pierce, Rachaad White, Najee Harris. You know what I'm saying? Like, so, the guy that I have, behind them is not Deontay Foreman, who I think has upside, even though he's also a boom bust play. You know what I'm saying? Like, like who knows? Like if the Seahawks go up big, will he get volume? Maybe not.
Yeah.
I think he's still worth playing for the upside, though.
Yeah, with James Cook, that's what it is. You look at it. It's like if you look at the performances that the other guys we have below him had last week, Dameon Pierce had a relatively quiet game. He looked better than he has recently, but a relatively quiet game. Rachaad White, same thing. He's going to be relying on that touchdown. Najee Harris, he had his token 10 points, and Deontay Foreman was on bye. James Cook just had a good performance. If you're picking between James Cook and any of those guys, James Cook looks to be on the upswing maybe. Are you really going to start any of those other guys over him at this point to get you maybe into the playoffs? I don't think so.
No, if I need upside, I'm also starting. I have Deontay Foreman at 26. I'll start Deontay Foreman over Najee Harris. I'll start him over Rachaad White. I'll start him over Dameon Pierce if I'm looking for upside.
Yeah, and that might be what you're swinging for. Like we said, if you're trying to get into the playoffs, last gasp, I think Deontay Foreman could be a decent play. Even though he's ranked at 26, I think he could definitely outperform that. That might be a little bit conservative, actually, with the way Seattle's defense, has been playing. They kept it. They let it be competitive against the Rams, and Cam Akers scored 2 touchdowns. So just something to note.
It was a divisional game, so I can see that. But Seattle, they're 5th in the NFL in points per game. So if they go up in this game, then it's very possible we don't see Foreman do his thing. Like he did his thing against 2 teams that don't score a lot of points, Atlanta and Denver. So, and then Seattle, is a high powered offense. So that's my only concern with Foreman, but he could still get 23 carries for 120 yards and a touchdown. Like that's in the realm of his possibility. I don't think Najee Harris has that in him this week. Rachaad White has that in him this week, or Dameon Pierce has that in him this week.
We'll see. I mean, Dallas, I wouldn't put it past them. They're not perfect against the run yet, even though they've kind of, bottled guys up these past few weeks. They're not perfect.
Dude, Dallas is going to blow out Houston so bad. That is not even
Please
funny.
don't say that. No. This is like
Zeke's going to have 2 touchdowns. Pollard's going to have 2 touchdowns. Dameon Pierce is going to have 7 carries this week.
This is like the ultimate trap game. That's my only worry, because it's also the Texas Bowl. It's like, oh my God. And like we said, we talked about point differential. Dallas is number 1 and Houston's 32. It's like the stars are aligning for a massive flop. But we'll see. I trust Dallas. I think this is a game that they're going to win pretty easily. That's why it's not hardly being broadcast. If you watch, I saw a TV map of where it's going to be broadcast. It's literally Texas. And the rest of the United States is getting other games. So we'll see how it goes. Hopefully it's just something we don't even have to, mention or think about this week.
Cam Akers, I got him at 27 against Vegas. I don't trust this backfield just yet. He's still like a high-end RB3 flex play. You can play him 70% of snaps last week. We'll see if the game stays close. He could get some volume. But
yeah,
at least we will know. Hopefully, we get a 2-game sample now with Akers as the lead, and that he's going to be the guy moving forward. But
that just means Kyron Williams is not going to get the touches. We'll see how it goes. This Rams offense is bad. I'm not expecting too much. Even if he does get all the touches, the ceiling is very noticeable with Cam Akers. 2 touchdowns is not going to happen every week, and he only had 60 yards to back that up.
Yeah, agreed. Devin Singletary. So I had Michael Carter. We're putting him around here, 27-28. And then Devin Singletary, J.K. Dobbins, and Latavius Murray to close it out. J.K. Dobbins, I'm assuming that he plays this week after being close last week. But this backfield is very hard to trust. He's just like an upside flex option. You're kind of hoping that he rolls in for 2 touchdowns, pretty much. But
he's a desperate start.
I would say so. Okay. I think we're going to call it here, guys. Appreciate everybody listening. As always, thank you so much. You guys are the best. Like, this season has been so much fun. And, just love having you guys here and joining us on the podcast. We'll be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern time right here on YouTube. And we'll be going over our wide receiver rankings and our tight end rankings going into week 14. All right, guys, take it easy. See you later.